Hello, hello, hello. Apologies to all for missing on Tuesdays. I'm probably not going to be making it up, sorry. Let's get started. Chapter 18 The Black Visitor. Ariel was about to wrap up the meeting. Woolworth had hit the high spots of the technical effort involved in establishing the robot farms and had given her a detailed schedule. And Derek had described the external modifications of the city to provide local and interstellar terminal facilities, the minimal effect those changes would have on the meteorology, and the detailed schedule to effect those changes. Ariel began her recap. I would like to briefly review the farm program again and summarize the schedule, but before I do, are there any other questions on the work that Woolworth and Derek described? No, Sinopos said. It was all quite clear. Was it acceptable? She asked. Yes. Sinapo turned to look at his companion. Sarko? he queried. Any objections? Not for the moment, Sarko replied. The farm machinery is highly suspect, but we must take you at your word, at least for now. Time may tell us otherwise, and, too, I am concerned. He stopped talking briefly, then, By the great Vatero! He exclaimed. What is that? Sinapo? Both aliens had turned slightly to the left to focus those red eyes on something behind her. Ariel turned to look herself and saw a dark gray monstrosity on the back seat of the lorry with gigantic wings hovering over the vehicle like some kind of avenging angel. Then it slowly folded its wings and started walking across the seat to the other side of the lorry, where it spread them once again, and Ariel knew instantly what was going on. But Woolworth had anticipated her by significant seconds, and was already running toward the lorry, shouting, Silverside! Silverside! over and over again, as though shrill decibels would anchor him to the ground. As it turned out, Woolworth had nothing to worry about. Silverside came to rest flat on the ground, spread-eagled, and by the time he picked himself up and retracted his wings, Woolworth was clinging to his back, and then Derek was trussing them both up with a rope he had hastily dug out of a locker on the side of the lorry. Ariel was torn between getting involved in the fracas herself and preserving some kind of composed demeanor for the benefit of the aliens. She felt her position as official negotiator and ostensible leader of the Robot City task force with special keenness, ever since she had been able to parlay her visit to that position leader without portfolio. As Derek was wrapping Silverside and Woolworth round and round with rope, Ariel turned back to the aliens in time to hear Sarko say, Perhaps this gives us better idea what further menace lies off-world. Miss Ariel Welsh, we resume construction of the node compensator tomorrow morning. He had rotated his big hook forward as he spoke. Then, as he turned away, a broad green flame, a meter long, blazed from below his eyes, and he leapt into the air. The heat from the flame hit her like the breath of a blast furnace. The alien Sinapo stood facing her as his colleague flew off. When he spoke, it was, in a fashion that left no doubt as to the temper of his thoughts. The words seemed to modulate the small green flame that flickered below his glaring red eyes, a waxing and waning fluorescence that resonated with the strange, buzzing sound imparted to his words. You've violated a trust, and humiliated before the elite, Miss Ariel Welsh. And he, too, turned and flapped into the air. She stood there a long time, watching them as they slowly and gracefully circled higher and higher above the dome. The first leveled off, and took up a flight pattern around the exact center of the dome. The second, however, continued upward, circling and circling until she lost it in the shimmer of the atmosphere. Derek had come back to stand beside her, but she had not heard him. A setback, surely, but perhaps not a large one, he said. Startled, she turned to look at him coldly, but said nothing before walking back to the lorry. Jacob was standing at the controls. Mandelbrot, standing between him and Silverside, had hold of the end of a rope where it trailed away from the coils that encircled Silverside and pinned his wings to his sides. Woolworth was sitting on the front seat directly behind Silverside. Derek had unwound her from Silverside once they thought he was under control. Ariel climbed slowly in and sat down on the back seat. Derek climbed in and came back to sit beside her. Jacob drove the lorry onto the road and then headed rapidly down Main Street toward the apartment. "I warned you about Silverside," Derek said. "You knew he could change form. I admit I didn't expect to change at so inauspicious a time. What did the aliens say before they flew off?" "They were frightened, naturally, and angry. They had no reason to suspect we were going to produce a being in their own image and twice as big. In their minds I've betrayed their trust. They said as much, and they will close the dome tomorrow morning," Ariel said. "Your new protege has just closed this planet to further development. Unless your genius and his remarkable abilities can somehow miraculously arrest the inevitable." "You're being sarcastic, my dear," Derek confirmed. A couple of intersections passed swiftly behind, and then he said, "But, we might just pull off that miracle." "That chance," she said. "No, a slim chance, but a chance nonetheless." She didn't answer, but got up and went to the front of the lorry to sit on the front seat directly behind Jacob Winterson. Right then, Jacob seemed like the only friend she had. She looked right through him, though, staring at the grim tomorrow and not seeing at all his remarkable musculature. Woolruff reached over and laid a fat-fingered hand atop Ariel's small hand. Ariel didn't move and hardly noticed. After a moment the hand was withdrawn. When they got to the apartment, she jumped out before the others and strode off. It was a walking pout, a demonstration for Derek's benefit, and she admitted that with one small part of her mind. With the other part she half expected him to come after her and was disappointed when he didn't. She could now think of several things she wanted to say to him. She returned as Jacob was putting lunch on the table. After a lunch that tasted like sawdust, she went back out on the balcony to get away from the others, but took Jacob with her. They sat down on the bench that lined the street-side rail. "Jacob, did Silverside give any indication he was going to pull a stunt like that? Where is he, anyway?" She hadn't thought to ask until that moment. She had wanted to forget about Silverside, and she had succeeded better than she expected. Her thoughts had been on Aurora. She had felt quite homesick all through lunch, and Derek hadn't helped. He had been just as silent as she. Her walk had cooled her irate thoughts. She didn't feel up to an argument, so she just kept quiet and ate. Immediately after lunch, Derek had jumped up and gone into the small bedroom. Her feeling of isolation had only been intensified, not only by Derek's silence, but by Woolruff's silence as well. That too had persisted all through lunch. She felt again the soft touch of Woolruff's hand as it came to rest on her hand when they were riding back in the lorry. "To answer your most immediate question first, Master Derek forced Silverside to lay on the floor of the small bedroom when we first came in," Jacob said. "Silverside had trouble getting through the doorways. He was both taller and wider than the openings. It was difficult for him to bend over and at the same time go through the door sideways while wrapped with rope. To answer your first question, the Wild One, as Mandelbrot calls him, it seems particularly apt. The Wild One talked to us briefly, but he gave no indication that a change was imminent." "He said nothing unusual, then?" Ariel asked. "He seemed not to know what humans are. This matter of imprinting and changing from one form to another. Were you aware that he goes through these changes seeking to find the species he can finally call human?" Derek suggested that might be the case. "Will he then cease to protect what he considers the lesser species?" "I presume so. Derek seems to think so." "Does that make him an entity of some danger to humans?" "It would seem so." "Then should he not be deactivated?" "I hadn't thought so before today. Derek seems to regard him as a valuable experiment that must be protected. And from the brief conversation we had, I suspect he still feels that way." "Perhaps you should talk to him again, Miss Ariel. Both Mandelbrot and I are concerned that the Wild One may get out of control. We are both perturbed by the first law, and find it even more difficult to be around the Wild One now that he has taken on this new alien form." "You're right, Jacob. I should talk to Derek." She placed her hand on Jacob's neck and softly traced the muscles as though she were stroking a pet. His concern touched her. It was she that he was concerned about. It was difficult for a young woman to ignore such concern when it comes from a warm-skinned being as handsome as Jacob. He was a dear, like a big brother. That thought confused her. When did she stop thinking of Jacob as a robot? Her regard for him was sisterly, was it not? It couldn't be anything more than that, surely. In spite of the way Derek ignored her in his interest with the wild one, Silverside. Perhaps her own impetuous experiment was getting out of hand. Since Derek had arrived on Oysterworld, he had not seemed the dear thing she had dreamed about so intensely. And Jacob's concern was pleasing, and the feel of his muscular neck was certainly stimulating. With that wild thought she jerked her hand away, jumped up and walked into the apartment, and threw open the door to the bedroom where Derek had gone immediately after lunch, and where Derek had said they were keeping Silverside. Derek had removed the rope, and Silverside was sitting on the floor between twin beds. He was leaning back against the wall, and had balled in that curious way the aliens had of reducing their surface area. That decreased his height by half. Derek was sitting on the far bed, and had to look up to peer into the robot's red-rimmed eyes. Ariel sat down on the other bed. Jacob had followed her. He stayed near the door, standing with his back against the wall. "I've explained the crisis he has caused in our relations with the Ceremonians," Derek said, "and Silverside is willing to try to straighten things out. He does not wish to offend the beings he is trying to emulate and serve." "They might likely destroy him before he gets the chance to do any serving," Ariel said. They were quite disturbed. "That is the chance I must take, Ariel," Silverside said, "but I do not think it is likely." The title Miss was stressed by its absence in Silverside's remark. He had clearly imprinted on the aliens in thought as well as in form. "Still, you had best shout at them from a distance," Ariel said, "out of flame-throwing range." "Communication by radio accomplishes the same thing," Silverside said, "without the danger you suggest." "One must first understand their radio speech," Ariel said. "The modulation is pure ultrasonic gibberish." "I've been working on that since we have arrived. It is not very different from the ultrasound they used to converse privately during your meeting with them. That meeting provided the clues I needed to understand the radio transmission I had picked up the evening of our arrival. I am now modestly fluent in the language. So fluent that I suggest you will find several representatives of their species awaiting us outside and probably well within the flame-throwing range." Derek jumped up from the bed and ran from the bedroom to the French window that opened onto the balcony. Ariel followed him. He started to go out but stopped. There were two aliens perched on the balcony rail, clearly visible through the sheer curtains in spite of the permanent dusk created by the dome. They were silhouetted against the white building across the street, like two huge black crows. They were more probably at street level. Derek and Ariel went back to the bedroom. "You have been talking to them," Derek said quietly but with emphasis. "Yes," Silverside said. "I've already opened my own negotiations." "And who have you been talking to?" Derek asked. "The leader called Sarko." "And what do they want?" "My release. I told them I was being held prisoner." "Hardly. You could have broken the ropes any time you wanted to, either before or after we got here." "Perhaps, but I didn't want to risk damaging my wings. To make myself aerodynamic, I had to sacrifice my original strength and ruggedness to the stamina and lightness needed for extended flight, which unavoidably entails a certain fragility. But now I must go talk to Master Sarko." "Tell them the truth," Ariel said. "Explain our sincerity and our lack of knowledge of this last transformation of yours." "I must always tell the truth. I cannot do otherwise," Silverside said. "But sometimes you admit things," Derek said. "Try to tell them everything that is relevant to our situation." "My first concern must be for my new masters, but I do not easily forget those like Life Cryo and Woolruff who have been so kind to me. Roping and binding, however, can hardly be described as kind." "Think of Woolruff, then," Derek said, "and the many kindnesses I have shown you before this last incident." "I must go and confer with Sarko," Silverside said, as he rolled to his feet, still bald. Then he partially straightened, still bent sideways and sidled through the bedroom door. Chapter 19. The Laws of Humanics. Circling far above normal charge altitude, Sinapo watched the silver alien and his escort of Ceremonians, all less than half his size, as they headed toward the cliff of time, far below toward the gathering Sarko had called to hear the words of the alien. Sarko was waiting on the pinnacle of the cliff of time. Sinapo had seen him arrive a quarter-hour before, not long after that final radio transmission that had set up the gathering. Sinapo bawled, and as he dropped he feathered an exposed edge of a wing, so that it set him in rotation and in motion toward the cliff of time, as though he were rolling down a ramp. His progress toward the cliff of time matched the progress of the small escort of Ceremonians who had attacked the silver alien in their midst, so that Sinapo and they arrived in the gathering almost simultaneously. Sinapo took up his perch on the adjacent lower crag, the position Sarko had occupied during the earlier gathering. His Cerebron elite were already aligned on the rock table below. The alien, who called himself Silverside, stood in front of the center of the line of Muestrians below Sarko. The Muestrian leader wasted no time. He began the interrogation of the alien as soon as Sinapo settled onto his perch. "Who are you, and what is your purpose in contacting us?" Sarko asked. "I am a robot, and I am here to serve you," Silverside replied. In spite of himself, Sinapo was impressed. The silver alien had mastered the Ceremonian tongue, and now mouthed it with only a slight accent. "You are a servant, like the servant who built the city we have nullified?" Sarko said. "Yes, only somewhat more versatile," the alien replied. "Were you created this morning at the time of our meeting with the aliens?" "No, I was created on another planet. That was merely a transformation this morning." "To what end?" "To follow as best I can the laws that I am governed by, the laws of the beings who created me." "And what is the nature of those laws?" Sarko asked. "I may not injure a human being," Silverside replied, "or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. I must obey the orders given to me by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law, and I must protect my own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws." "Those are the same laws that govern the servants who built the city," Sarko said. "Yes," Silverside said, "we are all robots, or so I am told." "And these human beings," Sarko said, "you consider them your creators and the one you must serve?" "Yes." "Then why do you seek to serve us?" "The laws in my programming do not make clear what human beings are. Clearly, only beings more intelligent than I could have created me. I seek to know and understand all such beings. Until I met your species, Ariel and Derek were the most intelligent beings I had found, with the possible exception of Wulraf." "We are the most intelligent beings now on this planet," Sarko said, "but we did not create you. We were told that Miss Ariel Welsh that she and other beings like her are human beings. We have no reason to disbelieve you. Believe her. Why do you?" "Neither Ariel, Derek, nor Wulraf created me, or so they say." "You were not created this morning to intimidate us?" Sarko asked again. Sinapo agreed with Sarko. That was the most important point. "No, I merely transformed my imprint on Wulraf." "Then this morning when the meeting began, you had the shape of the being called Wulraf, one of the three we talked with this morning?" "Yes." "And you did not transform according to instructions by Miss Ariel Welsh?" "No, I imprinted on a being like you called Sinapo, who seemed to me the more intelligent of the two aliens at the meeting." "That is Sinapo, standing over there." Sarko pointed with the middle appendage of his right wing toward his friend on the other crag. "I am Sarko, the other one at that meeting, the one of lesser intelligence." His sarcasm was not lost on Sinapo and the other members of the Ceremonian elite, but it went completely by Silverside. He walked over to stand on the table rock below Sinapo. "You are clearly the most intelligent being on this planet," Silverside said, addressing Sinapo. You or someone very like you must have created me, and so you must be a human being. No, Sinapo replied. I am not a human being. What is a human, Master Sinapo? The robot asked, and then Sinapo understood the robot's dilemma. It was, for the robot, a difficult problem in semantics that had become clear to Sinapo only at the moment when he replaced the words human being in the robot's governing laws with the word creator. That was the way this particular robot, for some reason, actually thought about his laws. Creator or human being or whatever term occupied that position in the robot's laws had not been defined. That was now clear. Perhaps human beings had created the Avery robots, but this robot was not at all sure that the same creatures had created him, even though both he and the Averys were governed by laws that were structurally similar. But from all the data, it seemed quite clear to Sinapo that it was the human beings who had created the robot, and that it was they his laws referred to. Miss Ariel Welsh and all those like her are human beings. It was a human being that created you, Sinapo said. It is they you must serve, and of all of them, I would suggest you give your most devoted service to Miss Ariel Welsh. We have gravely misjudged her and injured her now for a second time. And when you get back, pick a being for your model, for your imprint, that will serve her best. You make a poor Ceremyon. There was a long pause. A last question, Silverside finally said. You have heard me recite the laws of robotics which govern my behavior. It would help me serve Miss Ariel if I knew what the laws of humanics were. Have you deduced those laws from your dealings with the humans, Miss Ariel and Master Derek? There's only one law of humanics. All others are corollary to it. The law of humanics is the law of all natural beings, whether of low intellect or high, whether Ceremyon, human, or lupine like your woolruff. We all obey that one law without exception, even though at times, without thinking deeply, it may seem otherwise. We all evolved from chaos, and chaos governed our lives. But a seeming purpose can arise paradoxically from that chaos, and it is that chaotic purpose which compels us to follow that one law. The law is quite simple. We do always whatever pleases us the most. That is the only law of humanics. Now go and serve well your Miss Ariel Welsh. The wings of the robot Silverside opened wide, stretched to their fullest extent, and as Sinapo and all the Ceremyons watched, the wings seemed to slowly dissolve and contract into massive upper appendages, as the torso shrunk to less than half its original height, as the legs swelled to produce heavy thighs and bulging calves. When the transformation was complete, Sinapo realized he had seen only one other alien with a shape like that, the alien servant, Jacob Winterson. If he'd used a little forethought, the alien Silverside would have had an easier time getting back, if he had not been so anxious to effect a transformation. But Sinapo thought no more about it as he took to the air, heading for the charge station above the center of the node compensator to garner what little was left of the sun's radiation that afternoon. Okay, I'm sorry. This is just such a funny chapter. That last chapter was just... oh my god. Although, I have to admit, the so-called law of humanics is true. It's very true. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed. There are only 5 other parts of this left. Hope you all have a good day. Bye!